Good morning, Irene.
Good morning.
Hey friends, it's BrainStormAcres. I'm Henry.
And I'm Irene.
Today we're going to give you a rundown on the end of season. Well, as much of the end of season as we're going to have.
Kind of 2020 and what happens in general. We have interior gardening in our greenhouse, which is a homemade hoop house that we made ourselves. And then we also have the yard, which consists of raised beds, straw bales gardening, and semi-composted straw bales.
Right.
So those are three different categories of beds too. We don't actually grow anything in the ground except for right along the north side of the house. And those are also what we call armored beds, which means they've got hardware cloth in the bottom to keep the rodents out.
It's a lot of work, but it's necessary. If you don't do that here,
before the plant is perfectly ready to
they will come.
They will come. We always say if you plant it, they will come. I remember seeing it on Bugs Bunny, where here's the ground and here's the plant sticking up, and the plant would go doodle-doo, doodle-doo, shoo, and literally disappear.
And it's gone.
And it's gone. And that's what they'll do here. You'll have a beautiful hollyhock plant that's 6 feet tall, covered with blossoms, lots of leaves and everything else, and you'll come out one morning and it'll be completely wilted, and you'll touch it and it'll look like somebody stuck the bottom roots, which on a big hollyhock can get monstrous, will be a small pencil, sharpened pencil. All the roots are gone, and that's gophers.
So we had plenty of challenges this year, as we do every year.
This was a little worse because we had the hottest temperatures we've seen in 15 years, 16 almost now. It has been a challenging season. Was the garden a success? Yes. Were all the plants in the garden a success?
No.
And we were doing some experimentation this year, so as we go through, we'll have some of the details on that. We debated how we were going to organize this. Do I do it alphabetically? Do I do it by bed? So we decided to do it by plant family.
Now, one of the things to really keep in mind is that we garden pretty intensively here. Our raised beds are mostly able to be run as a wicking bed, trying to conserve water because we have to buy our water. It gets trucked in here.
Right.
So we tend to use those beds as many times as we can during the course of a season to get as many different crops off.
Right, and we have the ability to water a bunch of those beds from the bottom. So what you wind up with is you wind up with a crust of soil on top, and the moisture stays underneath. When the wind blows by, the crust just gets a little crustier, but it doesn't suck out all the moisture that's down below. The same thing can be accomplished by using heavy mulches. Mulch was virtually unobtainable this year at any price I could afford. There may have been some out there that was, but it generally tends to be kind of crappy, to be honest, in our area.
It tends to either be hunks of wood, or really light stuff that
blows away.
In our winds, it's gone.
Yeah, it's gone. So you can't use something like straw and stuff like that here unless you're going to weigh it down, because it literally will blow away the first time you have a decent windstorm. We didn't have any rainstorms. So you'll have that issue. So let's get started on the plants. First family we're going to look at is Nightshades. The Nightshade family includes potatoes, peppers, eggplant, tomatoes, tomatillos, and husk cherries. We grew a bunch of that. We did not grow any tomatillos.
Nope.
We did grow husk cherries. This was our first year with a successful husk cherry crop.
Yeah, this is the first year that we actually tried to grow them ourselves seriously.
I tried last year, but what I did was I tried to seed into the garden, and I have since learned that that's not a good plan because they take a long. They're like carrots in the sense that they take a long time to germinate. And they need constant moisture during that whole time. So you're much better off starting them the same way as you would start peppers or tomatoes. So lesson learned, this year we did it starting in seed flats, and we were able to transplant them out there. It was a total experiment. We had managed to find some in the grocery store because we didn't want to grow something we'd never tasted before. We knew we loved gooseberries, but we could not get our irrigation in place this spring in time to get gooseberry bushes.
Right.
And unless you bought things very early this spring, you didn't get anything anyway around here. Everything was cleaned out. So we decided on husk cherries because they're supposed to be very prolific. The fruit actually looks like a gooseberry. It's very tropical, I would say, almost in flavor. But it is actually grown the same way as a tomatillo is. With tomatillos, you get this little husk on the outside. Looks like a Chinese lantern flower. But it's got a little fruit in there that's, about half an inch to 3/4 of an inch is the biggest ones usually.
Yeah, now last year we had some husk cherries volunteer in the greenhouse. These
They're
were
wild. They're wild.
And we tried them, and
they were acceptable.
Yeah, we thought they might actually be something that we'd like.
Right. So we figured if that's the wild ones, and they grew here by themselves with virtually no help, we should be able to make it work here. We will definitely grow husk cherries again. They were delightful. The first couple of weeks that they came on, we didn't do anything with them except eat them. I would just bring them in and we would sit there and eat them. And we have several quarts frozen in the freezer right now.
They're really, really good.
Yeah.
And the nice thing is that it's a kind of a berry flavor that is kind of difficult to get around here.
But what we were looking for this year was plants that we could grow in a season.
Right.
Didn't have to overwinter them. Didn't have to worry about water during the winter or any of that kind of stuff. And they would stay alive long enough. They eventually were completely killed when we had frost down to like 22 degrees, which makes sense. They are a little more frost resistant than the peppers and the tomatoes are. They can get nipped a few times before they quit. But they're definitely popsicles now. The husk cherries were definitely a success, and we're going to add to that next year the huckleberries. We did not grow any eggplant. I am not a fan of eggplant at all. Henry likes them, but not enough to waste space in the garden. If he wants an eggplant, we can go get a couple at the grocery store.
One,
yeah.
Because I'm the only person who eats them.
He's going to be the only one who eats them. We did grow some potatoes in buckets, and that was a mixed bag, but we didn't buy potato seed because we couldn't. I spotted some early. Henry said it's too early. The next time we went back, they were
gone. We went back a week later, actually.
Yeah, so we won't do that again. If we find potato seed or if we buy potato seed from somebody, that's what we'll do. We were trying to just get small quantities because, generally speaking, the seed companies want to sell you at least 5 pounds and sometimes 10 or 20, depending on which seed company you're going to. And it's like, we don't have that much space. We did play with potatoes, and we got a few. And we're going to keep playing with that because we've learned a lot about why we were failing on the potatoes in the past. We had June bug infestations of grubs, which we took care of this spring with nematodes. And we intend to spray with nematodes again this coming spring.
Yeah, the nematodes work really, really well.
Beautifully.
Now, we're growing potatoes in buckets.
Right.
And what doesn't matter whether it's a white potato or other kinds of things. Mm-hmm. We'll talk about those later. But for baking or white or red, any of those kinds of potatoes, we're growing them in buckets.
Mm-hmm.
We started doing that because every single potato that we planted in one of our raised beds
had grubs in it.
Produced next to nothing.
Yeah, and we were trying to figure out what the problem was. We didn't know what this problem was. But when we grew them in buckets, that's when we discovered what the problem was, because when we dumped out the buckets, we had a controlled environment with fresh soil. And that year we had a June bug infestation, and we discovered it was the grubs from the larvae from the June bugs that was doing the damage. So now that we know that, there's something we can do about it. You could drink nematodes and they wouldn't hurt you. So it's nice that you can just spray this junk on the garden. It gets down into the soil. It kills the larva. Doesn't hurt anything else. You don't have to worry about your pollinators or anything. Win, win, win.
Now peppers. How do we do on peppers?
Peppers. We did pretty well on. We had the only thing I grew in the yard here was poblano, and then I had California Wonder, which is a regular old green pepper, and Untohi, which is a Romanian frying pepper. Those were in the greenhouse, and they have done very well. They are no longer going to be doing well because they froze to death last night, but that's just we were just waiting for that. But we got quite a bit off of that. We are not huge pepper eaters. I have a sensitivity to them, gives me an upset stomach. So I save my pepper consumption for things like really good queso and the occasional good Mexican meal.
Yeah, so Irene has a sensitivity to peppers. I have a sensitivity to tomatoes.
Right.
But I love tomatoes.
But his sensitivity is to green tomatoes.
Yes.
So you will never see fried green tomatoes in our house. Peppers did very well. They usually do. They're incredibly heat tolerant. So even when you get terrible weather, they can make it through as long as they've got enough water. For next year, we need to decide what we're going to grow. We haven't completely made that decision yet. Henry has requested that I resurrect an old variety that we used to grow that is an Eastern European frying pepper.
It's a great pepper.
Yeah, it looks like a banana pepper. It is sweet, but it's designed to be fried. Basically, that's what they do with them. But I know where to get it.
Yeah, I'm kind of out on poblanos. I have one more cooking experiment to do here to see if they hold up to what I would want them for. They're behaving kind of strangely. I expect to have some heat there and for it to stick around for a while. But so far, all of the dishes I've tried with them, the heat has been disappearing.
Well, there was something you cooked where the heat, you warned me about them because they were really hot, and they're not normally that hot.
That's right.
So I know that our weather was really wonky this year. Sometimes when you get extra hot, dry weather, it will make your hot peppers hotter. Now, tomatoes was a mixed bag this year, and we actually grew, and I wrote it down so I wouldn't forget, we actually grew 15 varieties of tomatoes this year because we were trialing some new ones. We had been gifted Amanda Orange from CB at CB's Greenhouse and Garden.
And that's a great tomato. It's a fabulous tomato to put in a tomato sandwich.
Right. We had problems with early blight with it, but we are definitely going to grow it again next year. It will probably not be grown in the greenhouse. It will probably be only outside.
Yeah. So we only had 15 varieties?
We had 15 varieties of tomatoes, and a bunch of those were trials that we had never done before that none of them produced anything that I would call a yucky tomato. There were some standouts. Granadero was a real standout. They are a paste tomato, and they just produce buckets. They produce late in the season. They do not produce, you're not going to get early tomatoes off of Granadero. You're just not. I don't care when you plant it. I've tried for years to get that to come off early. It never seems to, and I can never decide how much of it's me and how much of it's the world and how much of it's the tomato. But in the long run, they produce buckets and buckets and buckets and buckets.
There's two varieties that stick out in my mind that were a disappointment to me personally. Mm-hmm. One was the Alaska Fancy.
Yeah.
Because that was supposed to be an early tomato.
It was supposed to be early. We started it early. We did everything. And I think what the problem was with that is it's too sensitive to heat. So if you lived in a cooler climate than we do, I think it would be gangbusters. It's a determinate tomato. So when it did finally come off, it came off basically in like a week and a half. That was one and done.
Now, can you guess what my second disappointment was?
One of the greenhouse tomatoes.
It was.
One of the greenhouse tomatoes, Pisano. We've actually talked with the grower on that, and they're going to refund our money on the seeds. It's an interesting situation. I do not feel that we totally understand exactly what happened.
And I don't think the grower understands either, because we grew Pisano literally right next to a couple of OP varieties.
Right.
And another.
Right. The Pisano was right next to Amanda Orange, Gardener's Delight, and Big Beef. Now,
and they were all being run in the Dutch bucket system.
Right. So there was no difference in terms of the environment. I mean, literally, here's one plant, there's another plant, there's another plant. I mean, it was literally like a foot and a half apart. Same nutrition, same heat, same everything. And the Pisanos absolutely totally...
The pollen, they weren't pollinated. You have what is called by professional growers Puffy Tomatoes.
Yeah.
There's no seeds in them.
Yeah, no seeds and no pulp.
Well, there's precious little pulp. It's only a little thin rind
Well,
around
no,
the
you get the
outside.
rind, but you don't get the gooey gel that's in there at all. And the other tomatoes didn't have any trouble.
No.
Now we had a hotter summer than usual, but
Boy, that's an understatement.
well, but with the water cooler that we have in there, we can normally keep the temperature in the greenhouse below 95 during the day. Sometimes in the monster professional greenhouses, you'll see what they call a water wall, which is the entire end of the greenhouse is this funny looking stuff with water dripping down it, and that's an evaporative cooler, and it literally just blows the moist, cool air out into the greenhouse and cools the temperature down, and it works very well in drier climates. The other plants, if they reacted at all negatively, would drop blossoms. Okay, I accept that. The peppers even dropped blossoms at one point. But the very second that the temperature came down just a smidge, you'd see that all the new flowers and it was setting fruit, da-da-da-da-da. This couldn't do that. Now, we found out later